Hello, and welcome to a new segment for my channel that, until I come up with a better name, I'm just going to call Let's Review. Let's talk about Loren the Amazon Princess. As anyone who's been following me for a while will know, Loren is a visual novel RPG hybrid made by the company Winter Wolves. For anyone not familiar with the genre, visual novels use text and still art to tell a story without worrying too much about fancy graphics. They've been popular in places like Japan for a while now, and they're starting to crop up more and more in the West as well. They're reasonably popular with indie developers for the simple reason that they don't need to spend an insane budget or a massive coding team trying to create swanky graphics. They actually remind me quite a lot of the old Choose Your Adventure books that I used to read back when I was a kid. We'll discuss the story more in a little bit, but first let's talk about the gameplay.
As with most visual novels, you're going to be reading a lot of text, but since this is an RPG hybrid, we've also got stat-heavy turn-based combat. And how does it play? It's fine. It's nothing stellar. The battles are anything up to 6 against 6, although there will be times when you have to fight without a full party or when you'll be fighting fewer enemies. The classes break into your standard warrior, rogue, mage, but each character has their own unique subclass, which does do a decent job of giving you some variety to the available builds. One disappointing note is that your main character is limited to being either a warrior or a rogue. You can't be a mage. However, your main character does have all the good healing spells, so it balances out at the end of the day.
The combat itself leans a lot on elemental resistances and weaknesses. Mages, in particular Draco, can really dish out the damage, provided you pay attention to your enemy's weaknesses and exploit them. The enemies are reasonably varied, but tactics won't need to change much over the course of the 15 or so hours this game will take to play. You use warriors in the front row to tank and deal damage, while your mages in the back row rip the enemy apart. The main problem I found is that once I had 3 mages and 3 warriors, I never needed to use any of my rogues again, like some of the story made me. They were far too fragile for front row combat and not effective in the rear as mages. It's a balancing issue, but it did make a fairly hefty chunk of my party kinda useless.
As I said, the combat relies very heavily on resistances. So if, for example, we examine these hellhounds, we can see that they are very resistant to fire, but are critically weak to water attacks. So if I hit them with a water blast, which does decent damage across the board to them, and then with another water blast from my second mage, and that takes several of them out of the equation, I then hit this one with large amounts of damage. I hit with that, and you survive it, just annoying. You are paralysed. Again, status effects that crop up a lot. Paralysis is a fairly common one. You're also paralysed. There are some quite nice sound effects during this combat that I should mention. I'd rather take him out and bring him forward, which lets the rest of the party just wail on him with impunity, unless they're still paralysed.
I hope it doesn't come to this again.
And that's basically the combat in a nutshell. Nothing too complicated, but it gets the job done.
Beyond the base combat, we also have the boss fights, and those are kind of annoying. The main reason for this is that they almost always have minions of some description, which, yeah, it's totally fine. The big problem comes that when you've finished beating the tar out of those minions, you'll often find the boss has a resurrection spell and you pretty much have to start the fight again from scratch. It's really, really tedious and it drags out the fight, but at the end of the day, the combat system is still fine. It's nothing special, but it does what it needs to do. Whatever issues I have with the gameplay, however, the meat of this game is actually in the story and in its writing. And how's that? It's pretty damn good. It starts off with Loren, Princess of the Amazons and all-around bitch. Seriously, your introduction to this character is not brilliant. She comes across as vindictive and, well, downright mean, frankly. But almost immediately after your introduction to her, she learns that her mother, the Queen, and yes, there is an actual Queen in this, has gone missing, and thus she sets out on a quest to find her. To aid her in this, the Amazons sent her with one of 2 slaves, either Loren, the human male, or Eleanor, the elf female. And lo, do we have our main character! Despite the slightly misleading title, you do not play as Loren herself, but as her slave. And if this sounds rubbish, It really isn't. It works better than it has any right to. You see, for all her martial skill, Loren is very, very naive about the world outside, having never left the Amazon Citadel. So you start to become less and less of a slave and more of a guide. Shortly after, you encounter some more party members and you make a choice that will completely change how Act 1 plays out. This isn't an exaggeration. While you'll end up at roughly the same point by the end of it, the act and the characters you encounter will change significantly based on this choice. This and a few other choices throughout the game give it some pretty solid replay value for at least a second run through. By the end of the act, though, you'll have discovered Queen Karen and acquired one of two magic swords, revealing that it's Loren's destiny to stop the brewing war between elves and men and to defeat the Death Knight Faust, a demonic suit of armour who wants to, you guessed it, take over the world. Of course. Well, while the plot does hit a lot of high fantasy cliches, it works. Besides, we all know that when you're confronting demons from hell, it helps to have a few magic blades by your side, whether you favour knives or swords work pretty well as well. Whatever you've got going, really. God, not again. Would you keep it down out there? Sorry, guys. Joys of having a portal to the abyss in your front garden. You end up with lesser demons crawling all over the place. I'll deal with them in a minute, but for the moment, let's talk about the characters.
I've already mentioned Loren herself, but I feel that I should add a little bit more to it. I described her earlier as a bitch, and I stand by that. Initially. The further you get in the game, the better she gets. She has a seriously well-written character arc, and she matures, and I like that in a character. I really hate characters who don't change, who stay the same throughout. And Loren in particular has a really good arc.
Beside her, you have the mages Draco, Myr, and Alphysmo, and I'm almost certainly pronouncing at least two of those names wrong, along with a pair of dwarves, Dora and Ramus, only one of whom falls into the classic Gimli archetype of a short Scottish bloke with a massive axe. You also have Ray the Elf Assassin and Amakuki the Nomad Warrior. If it feels like I'm rushing through them, that's simply because I don't want to give away too many plot spoilers. Suffice to say, they're all well-written, enjoyable characters, and you can really learn some interesting things about them, especially in their own personal quests. At least one of which actually made me tear up a bit, so well done there.
Our foe was too strong. She knew what had to be done and she did it before I could stop her. I'm sorry. She sounds like a very remarkable woman. Silence filled the tomb once again, and Alphysmo turned away. Sorry, give me a moment. I'm actually starting to tear up doing this bit. Congratulations to whoever made this game. It does take a reasonable amount to make me tear up.
In addition to this lot, there are three others who are only available in the Castle of Namar DLC. Now, despite what Steam says, this was not Day 1 DLC, which is not a practice I am a fan of, but it was in fact a later edition. You have to keep in mind that this game had been out for a while before it made its way to Steam. So when it eventually did, so did its DLC. Namar adds in additional quest line to Act 3 and 3 new party members, all of whom crop up in the main game, but aren't recruitable. And I'll be honest, the DLC is kind of worth it for these characters alone. You've got Sazar the Monk, Mesfit the Dark Elf, and Chambara, the sexy Dark Witch, and they're all unique and they're all pretty interesting. And again, while they hit a few of the fantasy stereotypes, they do manage to overcome them and become pretty notable in their own right. It's also worth noting that this game contains a large number of romantic options. Depending on which gender you're playing as, some will be available regardless, some of them are only available to members of the opposite gender, and some are exclusively gay. For the record, this is the correct way to handle romance options, in that it's the way the world works. And if you're uncomfortable with some of the options, you ignore them. The dialogue options at the start of romance track are very, very clearly labelled, and if you don't want to pursue them, you don't have to. That being said, you'll miss out if you do. The relationships in this game are extremely well written and do a fine job of covering a wide array of human sexuality, ranging from tender and loving to, well, frankly, some kind of kinky BDSM type stuff. But ultimately, human sexuality is like that. Different people like different things, and the vanilla stuff that's presented in most games and films is far from the only option. It's also worth noting that each romance scene comes with a beautifully drawn image that leans heavily on eroticism and, well, at least one that's kind of nudging up against the barrier that separates art and porn. So, make of that what you will.
I've already touched lightly on the art style, but it is worth reiterating that the art for this game is absolutely beautiful. The artist did a hell of a job in bringing this varied group of characters to life and giving them all their own unique identity, while making sure they all fit like they look like they fit into the same world. That being said, we probably ought to mention one of my personal bugbears, and that's all the blatant fan service.
I don't mind it in this game. It should really bug me that most of the body armor in this game is about as protective as tissue paper against a hail of bullets, but there's a simple reason why I don't mind it. It's equal opportunity fan service.
This is the character selection screen if you're playing it with the mature content filter on. You will notice that Loren here has some reasonably sensible armor, even if he is showing off his midriff, and Eleanor at least has a little bit of some stuff that looks sort of like boiled leather, though again she is displaying her belly. Now, if I quickly go to the menu and turn the filter off, you will notice that Eleanor's armor is broadly the same, whereas Loren's armor now screams, "Here are my fleshy bits, please stab me." Likewise, while Loren loses the central section of her armor, Amakuki loses his shirt entirely. If we're going to go for excessive fan service, this is the way to do it that doesn't wind me up too much.
Besides, when it comes to armor, I do personally favour the lighter stuff, you know, leather over plate. It's all about finding a balance between mobility and, of course, protection. Let's face it, there's no point being armoured like a tank if you can't move an inch. As for the music, it's gorgeous. Though I will admit that the volume bounces around a little bit, so some audio balancing would have been nice, but it's a minor quirk. As for the voice acting, well, there basically is none. There's a few victory calls at the end of battle and some lines where characters attack or use spells, but it's pretty minor stuff. If you want voice acting, you'll have to troll YouTube for Let's Plays like mine, and well, the quality of my videos, anything to judge by, it's not exactly going to be pro work. The final question is Loren worth buying? Honestly, yeah, it is. At the time of writing, the game's going for about 15 quid plus another 5 for the DLC, which is absolutely worth getting. So as long as you enjoy reading in high fantasy and you don't have a problem with a bit of blatant fan service, yeah, this game's well worth a play. Especially if you can catch it in a sale. The replay value is solid for at least a second run. I mean, personally, I've finished it 4 times, so that should say something about its replay value. So go out, get it, though be advised if you want the mature content filter disabled, you can't do that with the Steam version. But if you buy it there, all you have to do then is pull down the free demo from the Winterwolves website, and it'll just detect that you have the Steam version, and you'll be able to access it within the and it'll give you the full game without any kind of hassle. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some demonic pest control to get on with. I'll see you later.